I'm excited to welcome to the Tiara Talk Show, Gary Rydstrom to the show. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. Again, we're continuing on with the Atlantis theme on this podcast because we're almost at the 20 years, right?
Well, I'm at the point in my career, this has happened with a few films I worked on, where you kind of get shocked. Someone will call you or say there's a 25-year anniversary of this film that to me felt like I only worked on it a few years ago. So yeah, 20 years is a long time. Yeah, and it came on. I mean, Atlantis was at I guess you could say, at the tail end of the sort of the rebirth, one of the golden eras of Disney. So, and
Yeah.
Kirk and Gary were kind of a big part of why that was the golden era. So, I was excited to work with them on it because they had done Beauty and the Beast and Hunchback, and that was kind of a wonderful reemergence of Disney animation, and to the culture in a really powerful way. So that, I guess it was the lost years after. Maybe they should read maybe Atlantis: The Lost Years. I don't know. There's sort of an interesting time, but it was to me it was great because and I worked on Hercules before this, so those two animated films were my chance to work on classic Disney animation.
And polar opposites too. So you with Hercules, it's more of a lighthearted comedy, and then Atlantis, you get this dramatic, adventurous film. So how were you originally brought on to the project, or did they have to kind of pitch it to you?
Well, I remember Hercules. I had to audition in a weird way. They had several sound people sort of come and talk to them and do some work, and so I auditioned for Hercules, and I was happy to get it. It was my first one. And then by the time Atlantis happened, I knew a lot of the Disney people, and they came. I don't know if they needed to talk me into it because I would have done it, but they came up to Skywalker Ranch, George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch where I work, and they brought the scene of the launching of the submarine, the Ulysses. So we played it on the big screen in our Stag Theater, which is this great theater, and they played this moment where the submarine gets launched, and it's this great combination of CG and hand-drawn animation, and that's all it took for me. I said, well, this could be big. So it wasn't exactly a pitch, but it was a inspiration. I think Don Hahn wanted to kind of just get everyone excited, so he probably went around showing that scene, which must have been done on the early side, and that alone got people excited.
They officially invited you to be a part of the team, which is great. What was one of the first things you wanted to tackle? Did you want to kind of complete the real world sounds first and then ease into what Atlantis would sound like? Or did you start researching what their Atlantis was going to look like so you could try figuring out, okay, what would actually sound as if it's from a different world, yet still so earthly?
Yeah, it's a good question because, the movie splits into those two radically different worlds. That kind of the 1914 world of human vehicles and weapons, and the kind of the classic adventure movie. And then this kind of spiritual world of Atlantis. And I love contrasts like that. It's always nice to have contrast from sound, so you can have these kind of glowing crystal world versus backfiring vehicles world. So but the first thing we do is start gathering stuff. So we recorded a lot. We went out into the world, and me and sound crew, we recorded. I remember recording some things that became recorded in like mines and quarries, things like that, and electrical stuff, just because there's a lot of old electrical stuff. But it's amazing what happens in sound is you record stuff and you don't exactly know what you're going to get. And I remember there was a sound we got from an electrical sound, just what seemed like a normal electrical sound, that made this kind of weird whop, just whoop, and it ended up being an element for a lot of the crystal energy stuff in Atlantis. So you go out thinking you're recording for the old 1914 human world, and then you get something for the Atlantis world. So that's the fun of sound design, because you go gather stuff and then you discover things. And the other thing I discovered is actually recording an old vehicle, an old truck passing by, but long after it passed by our microphone, it was blocks or half a mile or a mile away, there was this weird singing sound that it would leave in its wake, and that became the main sound for the crystal flying fish in Atlantis, which is one of my favorite sounds. But it's made from recording an old truck because you think you need an old truck, but then you listen to something and go, well, now that would make an interesting flying crystal stonefish. So that's the fun of it, you know? So the first thing was gathering stuff and seeing, kind of getting ideas from the real world, which is how I try to approach sound.
It seems so complicated to me overall because again, you're starting from scratch most times. Sometimes there are, audio sounds that I've heard so many different times in different films, but again, you really are starting from a blank template from this retrospect, and sound does make all the difference because it really puts you into the world of Atlantis. And you, as a sound designer, you've worked on several other films. So how did you find that this was something, that was up your alley, that you really wanted to pursue it as a career when, earlier on in your career, where did that idea come from? When did you know, this was just perfect for me. This is exactly what I'd like to do in the entertainment industry to really bring the worlds to life.
Well, it's the interesting part of my life, my career story is that I went to film school, and I went to film school because I love silent film comedy. So then I ended up as a sound designer. What happened to me was I was in film school during the time when Ben Burtt was doing the Star Wars movies and Walter Murch was doing Apocalypse Now, and there's actually an era. Maybe it's come back, but there was an era in the 70s where sound for film was really cool. Alan Splett was doing great sound for David Lynch movies, and Frank Warner did a great job on Raging Bull, and of course Ben Burtt doing Star Wars. I mean, it's kind of like if you were in film school, that kind of work was getting you kind of excited. So it was literally cool. I didn't plan on a film sound career, but I got offered. My first job happened to be at Lucasfilm, where Ben Burtt worked. I got a job offer up there to work in the sound department. So that's how it all started. And, it was fun to do sound there's a magic thing that happens that only sound people, I guess, really know. But when you put the right sound against a movie, and then it's like this visual effect where the sound sinks back into the screen and then it feels just, it's become one with the movie. And that moment is so nice that I got kind of addicted to that early on. But yeah, I was sound. To me, sound is exciting because it's a way to play with and communicate emotions to the audience in ways that, aside from doing podcasts like this, audiences have no real way to think about. And so we can sneak in all sorts of sound work that has an effect on audiences, and they have no idea what we're doing, which makes me kind of excited.
As a sound designer, do you kind of request to see visuals of the characters, of the atmosphere, just to kind of maybe put yourself into that world, even if you can't hear it? You want to see visually what you're going to add to it.
Oh yeah, and in any movie, and especially this one, but any movie, just seeing artwork, just seeing what I find that the sound people should check out the production design because it inspires. The look of this movie, I've been going back and looking at it again because of us talking about it, and it not only does it hold up, it's brilliant looking. It's so interesting and so beautiful and so angular and so cool. So good visuals like that always inspire what the sound would be like. It's amazing how sound always has a tone. There's kind of a coolness, or there's a threat to the human side with, there's kind of this gritty, kind of weighty, grinding reality to the human side of things. And then there's the Atlantis. Just look at the colors. There's the blue color of the crystal. It's a very distinctive blue, the crystal glow, and so that kind of defines what kind of crystal sounds it might have. So the look inspires a lot of the feeling of the sound, and it's hard to even explain. When you look at artwork, it kind of, to me, I start to imagine sounds in my head just without even moving images, just seeing paintings and character design.
For you, when you were from the beginning of, pre-production into making the actual film, how long did it take to get every single sound? And then what was the editing process like from there on out?
Well, since it was 20 years ago, I can't remember. Back in 20 years ago, we took a lot of what seems like a lot of time these days. So, in a movie like this, I would be involved with the sound before they even finish the animation, and we get so and working back and forth with their picture editorial department to send them sounds and that kind of thing. That's one of the benefits of animation. I did it with the Pixar films too, is that I would interact with the creation of the film, even years before it was done. While working on Atlantis, I remember doing early sounds for Nemo, which didn't come out till 2003 because I was looking at my library. So, I'm playing. So you can start years ahead of time, but then we probably spent 8-9 months probably total with the sound crew between recording sounds, cutting sounds, and mixing this movie. And we treated it like a big action movie. I had recently done Titanic and Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park. It was in the same vein of those action movies.
Okay, so I'm somebody who sometimes has OCD and I have to make sure all my files are in a specific folder. So when you create your sounds, do you do the same thing that I kind of do with my files, as I make sure there's a file for Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and there's a file for Jurassic Park and Titanic, so you can go back and then even create additional files and be like, okay, it's for this scene A123. You know what I mean? Like, how do you organize everything so you can go back if you need to and use something else previously before if you wanted to?
Okay, so if you have OCD, you would be a natural for working in my business. If you ever want to switch, you can come into sound. It makes great use of people who are very organized. And yeah, we have an ongoing library of sounds we've recorded for other movies, and the library grows, and you organize it by categories and subcategories and keywords. And I can't tell you how much still I look for like stone flying fish, because I just love that sound from Atlantis, and maybe find another way to use it in an interesting way in another movie. So we do organize sounds into categories, and so it has to be organized that way, so that both me and then editors who are cutting this movie, that you're cutting the dirigible fight, you go and you find the dirigible propeller sound, you find the machine gun sounds and the bullet hits, and they're all kind of organized in a ultra OCD kind of way. Yeah, it's part of the fun of it is putting together. This is one of the first things I do, is put together the library. It's like, here's the library, the kinds of sounds that will make this movie. So I hand that off to editors, and they start cutting away. In sound, and our library's gotten so big, and Skywalker Sound, we share, everyone kind of pools their libraries together, and it's wonderful, but it's so big that the organization, you can imagine, it's like the Library of Congress. So one of the things is you got to describe things in a
real detail, like extreme detail, right?
But a word that something you remember. I remember I just little thing. I had this sound I recorded from a toy called Wiggly Giggly, and it's kind of in Atlantis. There's in the villages, you see these little chicken-like creatures. So I called them Atlantean dodos. So if I remember looking for Wiggly Giggly, I don't even think I said Wiggly Giggly in the library. I just wrote Atlantean dodo. And then you have to remember over the years that's, oh yeah, I could use that, little Atlantean dodo sound. So naming it is a key creative element to all this stuff. Part of the fun is just collecting, in my case, 30, 40 years of recordings and design sounds, and having them to kind of sift through and finding new ways to use them. That, to tell you, I mentioned that truck driving away sound, which turned into a crystal stone flying fish, which is one of my favorite sounds in Atlantis. The truck wasn't recorded for Atlantis. It was actually recorded for a movie called The Legends of Bagger Vance, directed by Robert Redford. And I went to North Carolina and recorded all these old vehicles. And So this, I had to remember back to that recording and say, that's right, that truck pulling away. I remember made this really interesting sound that now I could use. I remember in some earlier movie as a research thing, I use Cornell has a great recording library of natural sounds. And I don't even remember what movie it was, but not this one. And they said, here, we got this great sound of a midshipman fish, which was these fish recorded underwater, discovered in Sausalito, California, about 20 years ago. And they make this thrumming heartbeat sound, which no one had really heard before. It was amazing. I could find no way to use that, whatever the old movie was, but then it became an element for the Ulysses submarine in Atlantis. So you just reach back into what other movies and the recordings, and find amazing stuff that the first sound design thing I ever did was for the movie Cocoon, because they were glowing aliens. So I had just gotten married, and I took the crystal champagne glasses from our wedding, and I did the glass harmonica trick. You wet your finger and rub it on the glass, and you make these singing sounds. And so I went back to that, became a great element for crystals in Atlantis. So yeah, don't throw anything away.
You have no idea when you'll be able to use it for another day. And do you have one in your personal archive that is in your opinion, is the most rarest sound you've ever had?
It came to mind because I was looking at this movie again, and there's a temple bell. There's a bell that you hear it in Atlantis in the beginning when young Kida is Atlantis is being attacked and goes underwater, and they hit this big bell. And I guess it's an exotic sound. Here's the story. It's a little embarrassing story, but I was in Japan for something else and had the opportunity to be at an old monastery. And I heard monks chanting, and it's a beautiful experience. And I went around recording things in this monastery, and I found this huge bell, very similar to what's in Atlantis. It had a log that you pull back and hit the bell with, and made this great sound. And I hit it once to get a level for my recorder, and then I recorded it a few times. It was great. And then after recording it, this monk ran up the hill and through an interpreter was yelling at me that was the New Year's bell that had only been rung on New Year's Day for the past 500 years. So I had kind of screwed that one up. But I figure that's probably the rarest sound I ever did because, hey, I screwed up. I was the crass sound designer at the monastery in Japan. I felt okay using it for something that was spiritually important for the loss of Atlantis at the beginning of the movie. So,
have you done a lot of research trips, basically, to go out into the world and find sounds that you might not be able to find in our country?
We take advantage whenever sound people, whenever we do travel. Tell you the truth, the budgets for these things aren't much. They say, hey, we'll send you to Costa Rica or something. Actually, on Jurassic Park, we got money to send someone to Costa Rica. But very few movies pay for that. So what we do is kind of as a group, as sound people, if we're in New Zealand or Australia, a lot of great sounds or the ambiences of Atlantis actually came from recordings. Richard Hims, a longtime partner of mine, recorded in exotic locales in Australia. So when we travel, people they damn well better bring a recorder and record ambiences or whatever they might find along the way. I am a lazy guy, and what I end up doing is finding a lot of really fun sounds right at home, and a lot of this movie. I remember Atlantis. There were a lot of rocks and big stone giants and stuff. So I just remember getting a lot of pots and rocks just from around our house, and scraping the pots against each other, doing that kind of stuff. It's amazing with the kind of sounds you can find in your own home. And I think I've said this. I said this in the documentary that you helped me find about the making of, and it's an example of how lazy I am. But the little submarines that come out of the bigger submarine during the Leviathan attack are really a water pick. So I had that classic water pick with the big plastic bucket of water and you can make all sorts of amazing sounds with a water pick. So I turned those little pulsing water sounds into the tiny submarines. So my laziness has sometimes paid off into interesting sounds. So a combination of taking advantage of international and wild and exotic travel, and don't give up on the interesting sounds that are happening in your own house.
So for somebody who would like to pursue a career like this, what is your opinion on the best type of audio recorder to be able to go out into the world and you're like, oh my gosh, this is an interesting sound, I need to record it, but having a clean recording, what would you suggest?
Well, technology has changed so much. I mean, a long time ago, you needed something really heavy, Naga or something, both expensive and heavy. These days, you can tell you the truth. You can record stuff on your phone, your smartphone, and if you don't have the time to go find something and there's an interesting sound, it's amazing what you can get technically fine on a phone. Otherwise, there are these things called Zoom recorders that a lot of people use. They're in the couple of $100 range, and they record digitally, and they're wonderful. And so, yeah, if you're any budding sound person who is interested in collecting and thinking about sound, yeah, look into like an HD Zoom recorder, or even things that are apps that turn your iPhone into a fairly decent recorder itself, and then start playing, record things, and see what you find. I recorded with my iPhone this morning because there was an interesting bird out the window during sunrise. So I had an app on my phone. I just opened it up, hit record, stuck it in the window, and I'll listen to it later. Hopefully, it's good.
I can only imagine it must be different for a sound designer because when you're out in the world, you are more, I guess, alert to the sounds around you. So are you always in sound designer mode? Is that you have to get the right sound, the right piece of sound that if you hear something, oh my gosh, I have to have this. Are you always on alert for that?
Yeah, and it's kind of a sickness. It's probably not a good way to be in the world because you're just always. Sometimes you're distracted from a lovely conversation because the tree is creaking behind the person, or the refrigerator makes a wonderful like whoomp sound. I remember a sound that I used in Atlantis that I just was driving with whoever family in a car, and I just happened to open the sunroof of my, at that time, a Saab, while going fairly fast on a freeway. And it made this great sort of air whoosh. Just so what I do, of course, is then I, drop off whoever my wife, whoever was in the car with me, go back on the freeway and then just go, drive it above legal speeds and open and close my sunroof for a couple hours and get an interesting sound. And that sound in Atlantis is the sound of the big carved rocks that spin around when Kida floats up into the carved rocks. And when they spin around, the big whoomp they make is actually my Saab sunroof opening up. So yeah, you just listen for the interesting sounds of day-to-day life.
Do you have to wait to have the whole film done before adding the sounds, or are you able to go scene by scene that is officially completed?
You can go scene by scene. Especially on Atlantis, they were very much into thinking about sound early on, which is great. So through the picture department, they had a guy who was focused on keeping their sound guide tracks going, and then Ellen, the picture editor, same thing. They thought about it, so we were able to send them things, and they put it into their tracks as they were cutting. And then would come back to us and we'd refine it. And because we knew that sound was going to be, to tell you the truth, when I look back at some scenes from this movie, I don't think I've worked on. I mean, I worked on some pretty big movies. Some of the scenes in this movie are bigger than anything I can remember. And I exhausted myself looking at them again and say, wow, that was a lot. So we had to start early because it was such a big part of the movie. And it really does bring an animated movie, especially, it brings it alive, Foley too, everything, all the sounds that we start adding to footsteps and all that kind of stuff really, really make a movie that could seem fairly unbelievable and cold. It really brings it to life. And it's always nice to see directors and Gary and Kirk, I think, were this way too. When you get to the sound mix, sort of the last stage of doing the movie, it's really when the movie feels like the movie. Everything is kind of temporary or patched and not fully done. And you do a playback of a reel, say, of Atlantis, and you've got a final mix. And Tom Johnson and I final mix this. And I think for the filmmakers, it's, that's the movie. This is the finished movie for the very first time. So that's always an exciting part.
For the sound in general, your sound is different with the design as opposed to the music that also accompanies the audio quality along with the character actor performances. So with those three, are you layering all three together at your end, or are you only working on the sound effects themselves?
Well, it's music and sound effects need to kind of cooperate. And I forget when we first were able to hear the James Newton Howard music, probably long after we had started, obviously, cutting sound effects and thinking about sound effects. But at some point during the mix, then we get the music. And then the final mix is a blending of sound effects, which is my deal, dialogue and music, those three major elements. So that's a big part of what the final mix is doing is sort of handing off between, let the music sort of take it here. We did a lot. This movie had a lot of moments where we had to change the frequency of, say, the crystal glowing so it would work with the music. So that was part of it. But yeah, that's another reason why the final mix is so exciting to see, I think, for the directors, because now it's the finished music with the finished sound effects and the finished dialogue all coming together. And the music was great. James Newton Howard did I thought, a spectacular job. It's a beautiful score that has to take into account that it's also a Disney animated film, so it's taking all these turns and being funny, and it's quick, but it's also epic. And he nailed that. And it was sometimes it's not a pleasure to work with music in a movie. It's a struggle, but this was a beautiful, beautiful score that was fun to work with. We joke in the past, I sometimes have an antagonistic relationship with composers because we feel like we're sort of in the way of each other, Not this one, we were more than happy to kind of work within James Newton Howard stuff. For that scene, there's no dialogue, but one of the interesting elements of it that I also love is they came up with, I forget the guy's name who wrote the language, came up with the language for the Atlanteans and the ancient language. I think he did Klingon. He was known for inventing languages. So they recorded a lot of chanting in this language. And so that scene is there's no dialogue, but it's full of the kind of stretched out chants of the past. And then for sound geeks, the sound trick for the sound effects of that was anyone can do this at home. It's really kind of a fun thing to do to make something seem spiritual. You play something forwards, or actually you play it backwards. Add a ton of reverb so it just echoes after the fact. So whoa, and then it echo. And then you turn it around backwards. Now the source sound is frontwards again, but you've got this backwards reverb leading up to it. So that scene is full of this kind of, you hear the chanting or the dialogue, even Kida when she says her line to Milo, it has this weird, unnatural, you hear the echo before the talking. And it's an amazing, effective trick. That's my tip of the day for any budding sound designers out there.
Do you still have some sound clips from Atlantis in your own personal archive that you sometimes occasionally use, maybe have used since then, or?
Yeah, I think, over the years, I would always, for lectures and things, I would try to pull a sound clip. And I'm sure I could find or go back to find elements of Atlantis. I don't have them easily available, but I love that kind of thing. And, when you say this is 20 years ago, a lot of people said, or have said since, that the movie felt ahead of its time. And it did come out at this really interesting time. And I was involved in my career too. I'd done some of the first CG movies. I did sound for Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park, and then I did, the very first Pixar movie. So there was this new world happening. And I think what happened at the time, the kind of the adults in the room or the serious people talking about movies thought, well, this seems a little backwards because it still has hand-drawn animation. And in a sad way, it didn't. This kind of approach to making a movie didn't really continue. But looking at it again, it is so timeless, and it has a unique cinematic widescreen feel to it. So for me, I get to do an animated film that feels like this hybrid of a Disney cartoon with the biggest adventure action film that you can imagine. So that's what was unique at the time to give it a kind of a reality. I mean, you said I did Hercules. Hercules is completely different. Hercules is full of a little bit more kind of fantastic or cartoony even sounds because it's meant to be funny and a fable. And Atlantis is pretty realistic, and it comes at it from a very different point of view.
And I know we're talking all about Atlantis, but I have to say to our listeners, you have to check out Gary's full bio, because we're just scratching the surface here. And I really wanted to make sure that this episode was dedicated mainly to Atlantis. So I don't want you, Gary, to feel like I'm snubbing any of your other wonderful works. You know what I mean? But why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the films you've recently done, and maybe what you're doing now that maybe we can look for, so we can look forward to the next film that you would do the sound design on.
Someone asked me recently, giving a class and film stuff, and someone said, "How do you not get bored over time?" Because the way they put it to me was, "You've done this for so long," which was a way of saying that I was old. But how do you? And the way you don't let it get boring is you try to do different things. And so, and at the time that Atlantis was made, I was, the other movies I was working on were Pixar, or the first Pixar features, which had their own kind of vibe, and then Hercules, but also I had these action films, this Terminator 2, Jurassic Park world that I was doing, and they were very different kind of films. On top of it, I was doing Robert Redford movies, so I was doing, Bagger Vance and River Runs Through It, and I just like to shake it up, try different things, and that all kind of informs each new film. So, and that time, if you think about 2001, was a real cusp of computer graphics and computer animation just kind of coming into its own. And so it was a dynamic time. And then since then, I got to direct some animated films, which was really fun because I had a real love of animation. So I directed a couple Pixar shorts, and I directed a feature animated film for Lucasfilm. Steven Spielberg is an ongoing director I work with. And so what I like about Steven Spielberg is that he tries different things too, just like Kirk and Gary did with Atlantis, saying we're not going to make a traditional Disney film. Steven Spielberg is now going to make West Side Story, which is what I'm on now, and it's a musical. First time for him, first time for me. So it's good to break out of your rut and try something different and shake things up. I think being that this is an Atlantis podcast, it's true to the theme that Atlantis tried to shake things up. And I think it's important creatively for all of us in the film business to try new things.
And there's always rumors that they might remake Atlantis into a live action film. So you have a way of talking to Steven. Just give him a little lowdown. Say, hey, we'd like you to direct this. No, just kidding. But I really can't thank you enough for being on the show. But I want to make sure I leave it open for you to talk to the fans directly before we end our chat. So is there anything you want to say to them to also celebrate the 20th anniversary right around the corner?
I just want to say it's nice when you work on a movie. You kind of finish it, it comes out, you kind of I forget about it. It's done. It's, and the reaction to it, if it's good or bad or big box, and it's funny how over time it doesn't matter. So what people who embrace or keep talking about movies like Atlantis do, even 20 years on, is it makes you realize that work on film, done right anyway, is forever. You know, it's not ephemeral. It's not just that first box office weekend. It's not even the first year. These movies have a life of their own. And then, you know, fans, people who embrace the movie, are the ones that remind you of that. And it makes you feel both proud that you worked on it, and it gets you more excited about the next thing you're working on, because hopefully, if done right, that'll have the same effect. So it's wonderful to hear about, years on, people still liking and getting something out of work that was important to the people at the time.